The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most pivotal and brutal confrontations in modern history, unfolded over 5 grueling months, from August 1942 to February 1943. It marked a decisive turning point on the Eastern Front of World War II, shattering the myth of German invincibility and setting the stage for the eventual Allied victory. This wasn't just a battle, it was a citywide meat grinder, a desperate struggle for survival fought in the rubble of a once thriving industrial hub on the Volga River. To understand why Stalingrad became such a focal point, we need to look back at Operation Barbarossa. Hitler's ambitious invasion of the Soviet Union launched in June 1941. Initially, the German Wehrmacht made breathtaking advances, pushing deep into Soviet territory. By the summer of 1942, Hitler shifted his focus to the south. His new offensive, codenamed Operation Blue, aimed to seize the rich oilfields of the Caucasus. Stalingrad, a major industrial city named after the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, stood directly in the path of this advance. Capturing it was not only a strategic necessity to secure the German flank, but it also held immense symbolic and propaganda value for Hitler. Taking Stalin's city would be a personal and ideological victory. The German 6th Army, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, was tasked with taking Stalingrad. They were a formidable force, battle-hardened and confident. In late August 1942, the assault began. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, unleashed a relentless bombing campaign, turning much of the city into a sea of fire and twisted metal. Over 40,000 civilians were killed in the first week of bombing alone. The initial German ground assault pushed the defending Soviet 62nd Army, commanded by the tenacious General Vasily Chuikov, back towards the Volga River. The situation looked dire for the Soviets, who were cornered with their backs to the water, fighting for every street, every building, and every room. But as the battle moved from the open steppe into the labyrinthine ruins of the city, the nature of the fighting changed dramatically. This was no longer a war of grand maneuvers. It became what the Germans called Rattenkrieg, rat war. The shattered factories, apartment blocks, and sewers became a nightmarish battlefield. Snipers lurked in every shadow, ambushes were laid in every hallway, and control of a single staircase could be contested for days. The average life expectancy of a new Soviet soldier arriving in the city was less than 24 hours. General Zhukov famously established his headquarters on the West Bank perilously close to the front lines to share the fate of his men and inspire them to hug the enemy, a tactic of staying so close to the German lines that the Luftwaffe couldn't bomb them without hitting their own troops. The fighting was savage and personal. Soldiers fought with machine guns, grenades, bayonets, and even sharpened shovels. Key locations like the Mamayev Kurgan, a large hill overlooking the city, and the Red October steel factory became legendary symbols of Soviet resistance, changing hands multiple times in ferocious seesaw battles. Another icon of the struggle was Pavlov's house, a 4-story apartment building defended by a small platoon under Sergeant Yakov Pavlov. They held out for nearly 2 months against constant German attacks, turning it into an impregnable fortress. These small-scale but heroic stands tied down significant German forces and bled them dry. While the desperate struggle raged within the city, the Soviet High Command, or Stavka, was preparing a massive counterstroke. Under the direction of General Georgy Zhukov, they quietly amassed enormous reserves of men and material on the flanks of the German forces besieging Stalingrad. The Germans, and their Romanian and Italian allies holding the overstretched flanks, were largely unaware of the scale of the impending storm. Their focus was entirely on the grinder inside the city. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. Two massive pincer movements struck the weak Romanian armies north and south of Stalingrad. The Soviet tanks and infantry quickly broke through, and within just 4 days, the pincers met at the town of Kalach, west of the city. The trap was sprung. The entire German 6th Army, numbering nearly 300,000 men, was now encircled. General Paulus, realizing his desperate situation, requested permission from Hitler to attempt a breakout. Hitler, obsessed with the symbolic value of holding Stalingrad, flatly refused. He ordered the 6th Army to stand firm and designated the encircled force as Fortress Stalingrad. He promised them that they would be supplied by air. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, rashly assured Hitler that his air force could deliver the necessary supplies. This air bridge proved to be a catastrophic failure. the Luftwaffe was hampered by the harsh Russian winter, relentless Soviet anti-aircraft fire, and fighter attacks. On its best days, it delivered only a fraction of the minimum daily supplies needed to sustain the trapped army. Inside the pocket, or Kessel, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food, ammunition, and medical supplies dwindled. The brutal winter set in, with temperatures plummeting to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The German soldiers, ill-equipped for such extreme cold, began to starve and freeze to death. Frostbite, disease, and malnutrition became as deadly as Soviet bullets. In December, the Germans made one last attempt to relieve the Sixth Army. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched Operation Winter Storm, a panzer offensive aimed at breaking through the Soviet encirclement. For a moment, it seemed like they might succeed. Manstein's columns fought their way to within 30 miles of the pocket. He radioed Paulus, urging him to break out and link up. But Paulus, still bound by Hitler's orders not to retreat, hesitated. He insisted he could not move without a direct order from Hitler, an order that never came. The opportunity was lost. Soviet reinforcements halted Manstein's advance, and the fate of the Sixth Army was sealed. The final weeks of the battle were a descent into hell. The Soviets launched Operation Ring, a final offensive to liquidate the pocket. They systematically squeezed the starving, frozen, and demoralized German forces into smaller and smaller areas. The fighting was still fierce in places, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. On January 31, 1943, with his command post in the basement of a department store overrun, General Paulus surrendered. A day earlier, Hitler had promoted him to Field Marshal, a cynical gesture, as no German Field Marshal had ever been taken alive. 2 days later, on February 2nd, the last remnants of the German forces in Stalingrad laid down their arms. The scale of the disaster for the Axis was staggering. Out of the nearly 300,000 men of the Sixth Army trapped in the pocket, only about 91,000 survived to be taken prisoner. Of those weakened by starvation and disease, a mere 5,000 would ever see Germany again. The total Axis casualties in and around Stalingrad, including the forces on the flanks, are estimated at around 850,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Soviet losses were even more immense, with estimates exceeding 1.1 million casualties, including a huge number of civilians. The city itself was reduced to a ghost town of rubble. The Battle of Stalingrad was more than just a military victory for the Soviet Union. It was a profound psychological turning point in the war. It was the first time the German army had suffered such a catastrophic and public defeat. The myth of its invincibility was shattered forever. For the Soviet people, it was a symbol of their incredible resilience and sacrifice, a victory that galvanized the nation and proved they could defeat the invaders. From Stalingrad onward, the German army on the Eastern Front was largely on the defensive, pushed back relentlessly towards Berlin. The road to victory for the Allies was still long and bloody, but the path was forged in the frozen, war-torn streets of Stalingrad. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into history compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. See you next time.